very much, Becca. That was a lot of fun. So I'm Kathy Steenster, for those of you who've come in since the beginning of the morning. I'm chair of the nonprofit Maple Center for Integrated Health, and we are thrilled to have you join us for this offering. I do want to acknowledge our sponsors. So the Fleshner Memorial Foundation, Union Hospital, and the Gibson Foundation are sponsors for the event in addition to the nonprofit, and we thank them for their support in making this and other programs available throughout the year. I'm really pleased to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Abbie Jones. Dr. Jones owns Mindful Growth, which is a private practice offering therapy, psychological evaluation or testing, and family and or school consultation services to people ages 4 and older. They offer cognitive behavioral therapy, accelerated resolution therapy, which is an eye movement therapy often used to treat trauma, depression, anxiety, and panic disorders. One of those amygdala-based therapies that Becca was talking about. And mind-body therapies like safe and sound protocols for emotional dysregulation, anxiety, panic, and impulsivity, and to patients ages 10 and older. Psychological testing is offered to patients 4 and older. Dr. Jones provides services at the Maple Center currently, and she has big plans for a large center coming up in the future, and we're excited about that for her as well. So please welcome Dr. Jones.
Hello. I am by nature an extremely outgoing person, but my deep-seated fear of public speaking still lives in my soul. So I do have a cheat sheet up here, and just know that I have practiced this presentation multiple times, and I went 28 minutes, but I'm going to cut it down to 20. We're going to zoom through. It's going to be way too much information all at once, but I'm very excited that these are being recorded and will be offered up in the future. All right, so yes, my name is Dr. Abbie Jones. I go by Dr. Abbie. I'm a health service psychologist, which means I focus on the whole body from the toes up. And one of the things that I'm very, very passionate about is reminding people that there is no imaginary disconnect here between the mind and body. When you treat one, you do treat the other. One of the growing pains that Doc was referencing is we are right now traditional psychotherapy and psychological services in the way that you would traditionally think of them. But with this growth, with this expansion, we are adding on therapeutic massage with a mind-body connection component, functional medicine, integrated care in that way. So more to come. I have a mailing list set up at my table. If you'd like to add yourself to it, you can get periodic updates. Today, my goal, though, is for you to walk out of this meeting with just 2 to 3 things, 2 to 3 things that you can actually implement today to make yourself healthier in your mind through your body tomorrow. I have to use the mouse, I think. I don't see the mouse. There it is. It was on the other screen. There we go. Okay, today I'm going to talk about neuroplasticity from my lens as a health service psychologist, but also just as a regular woman and a regular mom who has had anxiety my whole life. And it's coming out now. I can tell my voice is starting to shake. I'm going to be talking about this concept of neuroplasticity through the mental health lens, but just know that the exact same lessons that we're about to go through can be applied to absolutely anything that your brain does. All of the time, anything at all. If your brain is in charge of it, it can be practiced, molded, and improved. And better than that, you can change your brain to the point where on functional imaging scans, we can see that you've made a new permanent connection, a new permanent pathway. The more you do it, the easier it gets. You might notice right now that whatever your default mode is, that means however you're showing up in the world, your attitude, your moods, your behavioral patterns, it might not be serving you. And what I mean by that is whatever your normal reactions are to stress aren't healthy. And you can change that on purpose with practice. If you've been in rehab in any kind for speech therapy, for physical therapy, for occupational therapy, we're going to do the exact same thing. It's all therapy. We work in the exact same networks that those do. It's the practice that you put in, though, outside of the once a week or twice a week meeting with me that actually matters. In the exact same way that it's the practice that you put in outside of your speech pathologist's office, outside of the physical therapy room, that makes the actual change. If you aren't willing to practice outside of that office, we can't promise new neural pathways will be made. So here I want to give you a few simple tips and tricks to retrain your default mode into something that serves you, something more sustainable. And what I'll give you today means you never have to see me at all. It's just something you can practice on your own starting today to maybe make tomorrow a bit better. There we go. Now, neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout life. The brain can form new connections and new pathways and alter existing ones in response to learned experiences and in response to specific stressors. To change your brain's default neural network, so which is its go-to well-worn path, think about hiking in your favorite park, that deer trail that you can tell has obviously been used over and over again. Same thing in our brains, well-worn paths. To change that default neural network, you have to practice using the preferred path. Who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? What person do you want to be in the world today? More often. It's like that path becomes wider and more well used, and all of a sudden more people can go down it. Exact same thing in our brains. So we already do this in existing rehab programs, and I like to use OT and PT and SLP, speech language pathologists, as an example because they're so much more readily available in society, right? We understand those concepts well, but mental health therapy is the same thing. I want you to imagine your brain is like a city with lots and lots of roads and highways. And when someone has a stroke or an injury or a trauma or a mental health crisis, or they're simply born like me and they're an anxious person by nature, there's a major road in that city that then gets blocked. And the person might lose the ability to do certain things, to go out into the world. With a stroke, they might lose the ability to speak or to move a certain appendage. So a speech pathologist or a physical therapist is a lot like a city planner. Their job is to find new routes along the blocked road. For speech, the pathologist might help the person practice words and sounds using parts of the brain that weren't damaged. It's like learning a new detour path. For movement, a physical therapist does something very similar. They guide the person through exercises that start simple, become more complex, and they can then learn that body part anew. In both cases, all that therapist is doing is taking advantage of your brain's neuroplastic nature. And that's the same thing we're doing in my office. The brain's amazing ability to adapt and to change by practicing new ways of showing up in the world. You can essentially, not even essentially, you can factually rewire your brain. We will focus on three very broad terms today: anxiety, depression, and executive functioning. I want to talk about anxiety first because it's so incredibly common. When you feel anxious, it's like your brain is on high alert. You're wired all the time. You might be irritable. You might be restless. You might find it hard to relax. It's as if your brain is sounding off alarm bells, telling your body to prepare for action, get ready to get up and run. But thanks to neuroplasticity, we can actually train our brains to turn down the alarm. Techniques like mindfulness can rewire our response to stress, leading to a calmer mind. Right now, you might default to an anxious response, either frozen because of all of the what ifs, or if you're like me, constantly in action because what of all the what ifs? What if they catch us? Depression often shows up as like a cloak that you wear, a cloak of sadness, of loss of interest in activities, of a change in your appetite, sleep issues, physical agitation, fatigue. But this is where neuroplasticity gives us hope. By engaging in these activities that I'm about to present, you can create new, more positive neural pathways, new automatic ways of being, new deer trails in your brain automatically. Now, my favorite way to do this, to harness neuroplasticity, is through a technique called bilateral stimulation. So a person can see someone like me for that accelerated resolution therapy, ART or ART, not art like drawing, different way, which is an evidence-based, that means the data is in, the science has proven it, way for bilateral stimulation to impact your brain. Usually used with traumas like PTSD, depression, but also it's good for acute stressors. So you know a thing happened and you're having trouble responding to that thing, that specific thing. What we're doing is engaging both hemispheres of the brain through bilateral movement, these rhythmic side-to-side movements, such as auditory tones, but also tapping, movement of the eyes, which is what we do in my office, and so many others. My favorite way to do this at home is just to walk and swing your arms across your midline. It's the exact same thing. So what we're doing is we're engaging the corpus callosum in our learning. This is just a wide, thick track, a flat bundle of fibers beneath the cerebral cortex in the brain, and it connects the left and right hemispheres, and it enables communication between the two. When both sides of your brain are active, this interhemispheric communication is then facilitated. So the relation between bilateral stimulation, what we're doing when we engage both sides of the brain, and neuroplasticity is that stimulating the brain is structured, it's repetitive, it enhances that deer path's ability to form the new one. By activating both sides of the brain, bilateral stimulation integrates processes information more effectively. Years and years and years and years and years of research has been done on this. The science is already in, the data's in, it works. The problem is getting the buy-in from the patients and from the people who need it most. This reorganization leads to reduced symptoms. Again, the data's in. Now, bilateral stimulation probably seems pretty complicated, right? But it absolutely does not have to be. These are some examples that you can try at home. Eye movements with 36-inch corners. Think of a standard window, the bottom two corners. The key is crossing that midline with your eyes or crossing your arms across your chest by tapping your knees. My favorite is walking, because now we have the brainstem activated, our balance coordinators are activated, our motor cortex is activated, and I'm crossing my midline. But what do I do during it? Okay. I start with anxiety because it's so personal to me. The difference between anxiety and depression is that anxiety lives out there. Anxiety is in the tomorrowland. Anxiety is all the what if moments. It's almost like a set of stories that we've totally made up, that we've then catastrophized and assumed the worst possible scenario. You sound familiar? Same. So while you practice one of these bilateral stimulation methods, any of them, choose your favorite. Again, mine's a nice walk, crossing your midline with your arms. The 36-inch corners one works really, really well. Standard window. I want you to do fishing movements. So what I want you to do, if you're anxious, or you don't have to have anxiety, if you have anxious distress, which don't we all at one point or another, imagine yourself going fishing for the thought, crossing your midline. Find the thought, reel it back in, and examine it really closely. Look at it. What is that thought? Is there anything I can do about it right now? If there's not, throw it back. If you can't do something about it right now, that's anxiety. You can't possibly be productive with that thing. So what I'm doing is, as embarrassing as it can be to do movements like that in real time, it's engaging the corpus callosum. It's those connecting fibers. All of a sudden, my thinking brain, which is my prefrontal cortex, thinking about the thought, grabbing the thought, bringing it back in. Now my limbic system is activated because I'm emotional about it. I'm having an emotional response. And my motor brain is activated because I purposefully, on purpose, engaged my body in the anxious thought. And now all of a sudden I'm thinking about the thought in a way that I never could before, or never was willing to before. And I'm giving my brain an example of something that I can then work on differently in the future. To change your default modes though, especially those types that lead to stress, regular practice is key. Every single time you engage in these activities, you're then encouraging your brain to form new connections. And with time, these new pathways become more well-worn. But remember, consistency is absolutely crucial. You have to make these a part of your daily routine for any results. Depression is another. But what's really cool about bilateral stimulation is that it works to improve symptoms of depression with just the movements. You don't have to be ready for the thought change yet. Just the movements, no fancy additives. But if you want to change your likelihood of showing up differently in the future, that part is key. Depression is like a cognitive distortion. You're stuck in this negative feedback loop. You like my graphic? Did that? So this is an example of what it can look like. I think I'm fat and ugly and nobody likes me. I feel lonely and withdrawn and sad, so I behave accordingly. I withdraw from my social activities, I sleep all day, and I don't shower. Instead, while I engage in one of those bilateral movements, I can then practice reframing that loop into something that serves me. Even if you feel like a total liar, even if you feel like you're acting the part of someone who's not depressed, even if you're making it up, even if a cognitive distortion has served you in some way by stopping you from having to fill in the blank, go to work, leave your bed, take care of your children, whatever. It's okay to show up inauthentically at first because you are retraining your brain to make that your default mode and to literally change who you are and how you show up in the world. Now, while you're doing a bilateral stim, something you might do is identify the negative thought. So remember, I'm walking, I'm moving my eyes side to side, I'm doing any of the movements we talked about. Identify the negative thought. I like to write it down. I'm a visual person, which, by the way, we'll talk about in a minute. The whole, doesn't matter. Okay, you're going to challenge the thought after you've grabbed the negative thought that's not serving you anymore. And you're going to ask yourself, just very simply, is there any actual evidence that this thing is true? Is there a more positive or just different way to think about this thing? And then once you've challenged the thought, you're going to replace it. Again, you can make it up. It doesn't have to be real. You can make it up with something that's more positive or that you wish that you felt instead. And you're going to ask yourself, okay, now that I've replaced it, what is it like to feel that in my body? Or what would it be like if I could feel that in my body? You're going to visualize the new actions, the new changes that you've made throughout. Rinse and repeat. Because remember, to change your default modes, you have to practice this stuff. Okay, my very, very favorite disorder, because it's so all-encompassing, is executive dysfunction. Executive functioning, you're going to hear me call it EF. EF is a challenge across basically the entire DSM, which is the book that we use to diagnose. Think of EFs as the CEO of your brain. They manage your thoughts, your actions, your emotions. So if a thing is done on purpose and acted on with intent, it's an EF. Now, if it's not done on purpose or with intent, it's an executive dysfunction. Now, there's this list of 33 skills by a psychologist who I really love named Pam Dawson. And what I've done is I've taken her big master list, and in my dissertation for school, I took that list of 33 and I shrunk it down to 3 core executive functions. Those are inhibitory control, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. The final executive function to develop is called metacognition. It's a part of your cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to think about the way you think and change the way you're thinking according to independent and individual inputs. Inhibitory control. Inhibitory control is the first thing to develop in kids, but it doesn't always develop there. Inhibitory control is like your inner assistant. It's reminding you, think first before you choose to act. It helps you manage impulses, dodge distractions. Next, and the most common complained about, though it's not often it, is working memory. Working memory is like the sticky note in your brain. It's not permanent. It's just there right then when you need it. It's helping you hold on to information when you need it, like say you gave me your phone number right now and I had to remember it long enough to either write it down or put it in my phone. That's working memory, if I'm able to do it. And then there's cognitive flexibility, which is your brain's agility to adapt to those changes according to new inputs. It's like thinking on your feet, finding a new path when something else is blocked. Cognitive flexibility is the last to arrive, and cognitive flexibility is the first to go. Think about dementia patients. One of the first signs is all of a sudden they're stubborn or inflexible when they once weren't. By understanding, though, and by exercising these 3 areas through very targeted activities, we're essentially hitting the gym for our brains. It could be practicing mindfulness to improve inhibitory control. It could be doing memory exercises on purpose for working memory. It could be engaging in problem solving in a way that you haven't done it before. So through these practices, we're harnessing neuroplasticity. Okay. If these things don't work, I'm saving time here. It's executive dysfunction. What that looks like is premature aging, forgetfulness, crotchety old man syndrome. With kids, it's, oh, look, a squirrel out the window. I can't focus long enough to learn. So why do I want to focus on executive functioning? Executive functioning is a better predictor of health, wealth, and crime than IQ and socioeconomic status combined. And you can actually do something about this one. So the good news is executive functioning is the very most trainable and most plastic part of our brain because it lives up here in your prefrontal cortex. This is your thinking brain. This is the one you can do something about on purpose and with intent. In fact, by engaging in these interventions, you're using your executive functioning. So it's not only anecdotal either. Again, you heard me say earlier how the data's in, the science is done. It's not only the I feel better or grandpa seems more with it today, it's the structural output seen on scans is different. These recorded outcomes are impressive. I'm impressed anyway. And it's also effective at any age. It was once believed that we were born with all of the stem cells that you will ever have, but we now know that through these exercises, you can make your own. And I just think that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Okay. There are so many studies. Oh, there are so many studies supporting the effects of simple childhood games like red light, green light, and Simon Says, even in adulthood. When you play Simon Says or red light, green light, you're doing start, stop tasks. You can change the game to fit any environment you want. And if you're an adult and you're willing to play, do. Emotion coaching is incredibly effective as well. Emotion coaching is when a parent or a partner or a coach involves the individual in helping them understand their own emotions. Emotion coaching involves actively recognizing, validating, and responding to a person's emotions simply by being a mirror. Your job is to activate the mirror neurons in someone else's brain. Mirror neurons are these really cool cells that light up on scans just as strongly when you do something compared to when you watch someone else do it. What it means is you have to do 3 things. You have to give an emotion a name. Giving it a name activates a different part of your brain. You have to find the emotion in your body. Now, all of a sudden, by thinking about where that emotion lives in my throat, in my tight gut, in my need to move, I'm involving my motor cortex. It could be tight and shaky. And then learning how you can regulate your body if you're not ready to regulate your mind first. What we're trying to do is learn that big feelings don't have to be big behaviors. Okay, I'm going to give one example and then I'll be quiet. We can talk through some questions and comments. When adults and teens aren't open to emotion coaching, instead you can use that mirror neuron. So what that might look like is you're fighting with your spouse. Instead of listing all of the many ways you want your spouse to change, be the mirror. Instead, you can say, you know what, I'm feeling really angry right now, and I can tell because my voice is rising and I'm getting very, very tight. I tried taking some breaths earlier. I'm triggered. I'm going to go on a walk. Maybe when I come back, we can have this conversation again. You're not doing it once. You're not doing it at the second fight. You're doing it at least 10 times over a short period of time. Now, all of a sudden, that person has a model, a mirror to work on in the future. That's emotion coaching. Now, I could truly go on about these things all day long. I have pages of notes, but I think I am just about out of time. Multiple parts of your brain, cross the center line, lots of ways to do it. Thank you all. What questions can I answer? Yes. Oh, false alarm, everybody. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, that makes me happy. Working memory. Working memory is the most common complaint that we get as health service psychologists when we're trying to help someone through the aging process or after a specific trauma. Very often it's referred to, I just can't remember that, or I can't remember parts of my childhood or the natural progression as we age. But again, more good news, working memory is actually the most plastic, the most moldable, the most changeable of the executive functions. Step one is to use lots of different senses, multiple senses. I almost went on a tangent earlier talking about how there's no such thing as my learning style. There's just lots of different ways to learn, and all of them are somatic experiences, meaning they're feeling their senses, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. When you engage those different areas and you're trying to enhance your working memory, they're more likely to become more permanent because of neuroplasticity. Yes, you all got a point. You want to involve your visualization and your spatial memory because that is how humans learn best. The whole I'm auditory, I'm kinesthetic, I'm a visual learner. It's totally been disproven by the science. We are all of them. Dogs learn best this way. We learn best essentially this way, but when we can combine them all, it's more permanent. One strategy, though, that I've seen a great deal of success on and that I use all the time myself combines these senses. So what I do when I'm trying to learn something new is I draw a map of either my house or an imaginary house on a piece of paper. And I give that map names. So here's what I mean by that. You could learn different structures and functions of the brain. And my living room would be the limbic system, because the limbic system is where all the love and emotion of the home occurs. The kitchen is the brainstem. Can't live without it. My office is the prefrontal cortex. It's where I do my best thinking. The kids' rooms could be the motor cortex, and so on and so on. And within each of these rooms, you make associations. What are you trying to learn? Or what are you trying to not forget? Or what are you trying to rewire? Put it on your map. You've given yourself a visualization. You've given yourself something physical to follow. When testing or recalling or practicing the skill of remembering, get up and move around through your house, either your house on paper or your literal house, and practice the remembering skill. Adults, all of us, must actively prioritize practicing learning. Use it or lose it. Guys, that man back there taught me more about all of this than anyone else. No. Now quiet up. Let me finish here. Metacognition and adaptability is the very last to develop. Learning that multiple things can be true at once and developing an open-minded and nuanced perspective is incredibly hard. It's the last to develop. It does not naturally develop until well into adulthood, and it's the first to leave with disease or dementia or age. I want you to practice, actively practice, try these things, putting yourself in the shoes of other people. Try to understand their perspective, and you can do this visually instead. You can imagine what it would be like to sit in that chair and look up at me. You're rewiring the brain in that way. You can practice learning that someone else's truth can be different from yours, and it doesn't make them right or wrong, it just is. Metacognition means thinking about the way you're thinking. Just like you use your eyes to see the things around you, you're using your brain to understand how it's learning. So I want you to imagine that you're trying to solve a puzzle, and while you're working on it, you can also think about how you're trying to solve it. If you're a Sunday crossword person, think about the strategy that you're using. Is it a good strategy? Start to question yourself. I know this is the way that I've always done it, but is this the most effective way? Are you getting stuck on a certain part? Think back, why is that the part that I'm stuck on? By being your own problem solver, by learning how to problem solve and how to think differently, you can understand what you're doing well. You can understand how to solve the puzzle faster in the future. And I want you, everyone here, me too, to actively seek feedback from people you trust and from total strangers. Ask them, teachers, mentors, peers, how am I doing? Give me some feedback here. What can I do differently? What can I do that would be more effective? What did you take from this? What do you think that child took from this? This feedback then provides your brain with alternative perspectives. Now, all of a sudden, you have a new model to work off of that if you wouldn't have practiced the skill, you wouldn't have. And finally, this is just a list. If you're going to take a picture of anything, take a picture of this. These are just a few more strategies that I've read a great deal of research on showing effectiveness. You can do it with lightweight for added benefit. Cognitive motor interventions are just dual task interventions, brain and body engaged at one time. Doing two things at once is good for you. And it requires a physical and a mental task to be done at one time. My favorite is to do Nordic walking. Nordic walking gets its name because of a fancy walking stick that comes with it and engages your grip and wrist strength at once, but you can do it with a set of light hand weights too. Cross your midline, and while you're doing it, work on some jigsaw puzzles. Have a list in your back pocket that you pull out every once in a while. You could also do something simple like count backwards by strange numbers, count backwards by 17. That would take me a long time. Find something that's hard for you, do it while you move your body. It can be a walk, doesn't have to be a walk. It can literally be this while you sit in a chair. I hope that you took just a few things today away, anything at all that you're willing to do to rewire your brain. And now I'm actually done. Can I answer any questions? I do have a booth towards the north end of the building. If you want to join our email list, we're keeping a list for updates. We are moving physically. Have absolutely loved our time in the Maple Center. We'll be there for several more months, but once the building is finished, we'll be kind of in between the East Side and Riley. Okay. If you have questions, feel free. All right. Thank you all.